Get started. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Caitlin Southwick. I am the founder and CEO at Key Futures. Key Futures is what I like to call the action branch of our sister company, a nonprofit organization, Key Culture. So Key Culture and Key Futures are both completely dedicated to the nexus of sustainability and culture. At Key Culture, we do a lot of research and development and create resources to help people understand a little bit more about what sustainability is in the context of culture, and also about how people can take action for sustainability. But of course, we want to be able to translate that action into real action. So through Key Futures, which is our action branch, we provide the support systems and programming to turn our desires into reality. In 2022, in December, we hosted the International Climate Control Conference, which basically brought together all of the leading experts from around the globe talking about the issue of climate control. And what was so exciting to me and so surprising was that we're all on the same page here. We all are ready to update our climate control conditions. Climate control can feel like something that's a little out of control, but actually what we've seen over the last year and a half is that it's something that very much we can take control of. And not only can we update our climate control conditions to be better for the environment and for our pocketbooks, but actually it's proven that it's best practice to use climate control conditions that are more tailored to our collections and able to provide the best environments possible. So after the Climate Control Conference in 2022, we launched our first climate control pilot program in collaboration with the Danish Museum Association. These pioneers had 10 museums join us to go through the process of updating climate control. And we're going to hear from some of our colleagues in the Danish cohort today. In addition, of course, this is a topic that is a global issue. And so we've been working with Key Futures colleagues in Belgium particularly, and we're going to hear from our colleagues at FARO about storage conditions, as well as our colleagues at the Royal Ontario Museum who have been looking specifically at loan agreements and are also participating in our climate control program. I'll be talking a little bit more about the programming today, and as well as ways that you can get involved. But of course, we're here today to talk a little bit more about specific issues. We're going to be focusing on storage, relative humidity and temperature, HVAC systems, and loan agreements. I'm hoping that what you all take away from our discussions today is basically the idea that you can do this too. Seeing how it's done, storytelling is always the best way to be able to take action ourselves. And of course, we also are here to show you that you are not alone in this journey, that this is something that takes collective action. And the more we can communicate about this and the more we work together, the faster we will be able to achieve our goals. And also, the more transparency we have on this topic, which leads to more accessible loans and just a more sustainable cultural sector for us all. So it is my absolute great pleasure today to be joined by 4 of our Key Futures participants, both from our Key Futures Sustainability and Culture program and our Climate Control program, who have been involved with this topic for the last several months through to a year. And we're going to be hearing basically about how they're tackling the issue of climate control in their contexts. So I'd like to start off by introducing our colleague Wouter Lammens from FARO in Belgium, who's going to be talking to us today about sustainable storage solutions. So Wouter, I will kick off to you, please.
Thank you very much. Is my screen showing?
It is now showing. Yes, thank you, Wouter.
Okay. Thank you very much, Caitlin and colleagues, for the opportunity to share some ideas on these low energy storage facilities from Flanders. Seem to have trouble going to the next slide.
We always love our technical staff. No worries. All right. Well, while you're sorting that out, Wouter, I would just like to mention that Wouter and FARO are part of our Sustainability and Culture program. So at Key Futures, we provide holistic support for sustainability action in the cultural sector. And we've been working with FARO for, I guess, over a year now. And we've been helping to support the research and also implementation of sustainability actions for member organizations of FARO. So we'll try resharing our screen. And I think that should do the trick. Any luck, Wouter?
No, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Sometimes you have to exit out of the program and then try it again. So we'll keep that going. But I would also like to mention that, of course, one of the exciting things that we're going to be seeing today is the intersection and the international components of being able to have these conversations across the globe. It's really a benefit to our Danish cohort as well to see what Wouter is doing today. So really excited to hear feedback there. Okay, we're going to give it a try. Third time's a charm, right?
Yeah. No idea what I'm doing wrong. I'm very, very sorry. We tried everything out.
No worries. No worries. Yeah, sometimes the presentation you have to exit out when you... Oh, there we go. This looks promising.
Hope so.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yay! Success.
We're on a roll.
Well done.
Very
All right, Wouter, I'll stop talking and I'll turn over to you.
Thank you for your patience, everybody. So I'm just going through a small introduction together with you to get an idea of, okay, what Flanders is and how we organize our heritage community and what the role of FARO might be within that community. But I mainly want to talk to you about two cases I've been involved with, two storage facility programs, both in the province of Western Flanders, close to the North Sea. And I'll try and finish up with a number of my personal lessons learned and with some ideas on how I feel about the future we can shape right now. Just to give you an idea, we're in Europe, we're in Belgium, and Belgium is a federal state where culture is organized. It's organized by the communities. We speak 3 official languages in Belgium, and that's why we have a picture of a country where culture is organized within a language community, you could say. If you're very attentive, you see a small dot in the middle of the country. That's our capital region, which is a bit of a special case, but there's also Flemish or Dutch-speaking people there. So that's one of the communities we work with. Probably also important to note before I get any further into my own topic is that in Belgium, in Flanders, we do not have the automatic link between the cultural heritage and immovable heritage like monuments and landscapes. A lot of countries have one department, have one minister of culture. It's a bit different in Flanders. And so you have one thing, one idea is cultural heritage. That's what we call movable and intangible heritage. And you have the Minister of Culture of the Flemish community who's responsible there. And you also have something like immovable heritage, very logical, I would say, monuments and landscapes. And that resides under another minister. What we do, we work for this cultural heritage. So FARO is a non-governmental organization supporting heritage professionals, and we try and make them grow. We do this through a number of activities and workshops and lessons and so on. But the idea is that we are together in the same boat, and we try to safeguard cultural heritage, keep it current, keep it relevant. It's us. It's a team based in Brussels, but we work for Brussels and the whole Flemish community. Okay, my problem is probably also your problem. There's a shortage in good heritage storages. And not only that, funding is limited. I'd like to talk to any colleagues who have no limitations in their funds, but I'm afraid we won't find many here with us today. Funding is limited, which means, okay, you have a fixed number of personnel, staff members. What can they do? What can they change? you have your energy costs, which is a very big issue for every organization, also for the heritage organizations. And so any wishes for new infrastructure are probably in a very, very early stage. They get into problems because the funding is limited. This was particularly pressing in the first decades of the new millennium, the years 2000 to 2010 in Flanders. But meanwhile, with our colleagues in Denmark, there were a number of low energy buildings being realized, specifically to house heritage. And this quickly raised some interest within the Netherlands. And because we share the same language, we very easily saw their report from a visit to Denmark. We saw it pass through the internet, and we got the same idea. Let's go and visit one of these examples. We chose Vejle in Denmark to have a study trip and to study these examples. This is a picture of the facility we visited. And then, after the first ideas, a new opportunity was raised. Between 2010 and 2016, all of a sudden, extra funding was found to let the provinces help funding new infrastructure, heritage storages. And so the idea was, okay, we have a number of problems. We have many people trying to upgrade their infrastructure. And can we find a solution that fits the needs of many? And the first example we worked with was the city of Yper, Wipers in English. But there had to be a number of conditions that were met, and that was there had to be some co-funding from the city. Couldn't be something that the province took on itself alone. And the storage facility had to be open to collections from the entire region, so not just for one city. There had to be cooperation as early as in the designing stages, but they also, all the partners had to think about how they would use these facilities together in the future. The architects that came on board, they had a lot of lessons from Denmark and Holland, the Netherlands, that they incorporated in their work. So, new model for low energy storage facilities that we learned, that we got to know in Denmark. We try to adapt. And what are these main characteristics? You have a very modern, highly isolated building, isolation in the outer walls and the roof, but you have your ground floor unisolated, so that the soil could be some kind of natural system that warms up your room, your storage facility in the winter, but it also helps to cool it down in summer without any additional energy needed. Some small part just to dehumidify, but this would be some energy that could be provided by, for instance, solar panels on site. The drawing shows you a bit in a schematical way how that should work, but you see a ground floor getting some energy into the building without that many extra energy needed. This brings me to my first case, the actual realization of a storage facility in Yper. This is where you can, here you see it already finished. What a beautiful building. It's in the province of West Flanders. You see the green arrow over there just to help you locate the site. It's on the outskirts of the town, and probably you should, if this presentation in a later stage is shared, you can click on the link and you will find some more information. It's in Dutch, unfortunately, but I hear that Google Translate can fix that problem for you. Here's some figures of this case. It's a building 46 by 30 meters. It has about 2,000 square meters of storage capacity, as mentioned before, for the town of Yper and the region. And it also has 800 square meters of functional areas. You can see the different functions mentioned there. And the freezer at the bottom is used for wet archaeological collections. how much did it cost, you might wonder. So I put that information in there as well. It's about 2.5 million euros, uh, including taxes. Of course, this is 2017. I can imagine that nowadays that would be a bit higher, but it was really a combination of the province having some money and the building lot, very important. So the building ground is not incorporated in the total cost, but you can see that the city cooperated and the Flemish government granted an extra amount of €500,000. It won a Publica Award prize because of its sustainability character, this building, and it was officially opened the 8th of December 2017, which is a big advantage for us now because we can see how it functioned over 7 years. And the good news is this energetic concept, it proves to work. We had it analyzed before we constructed the building, but now it's really, we have the data to prove that it works. So it's a safe building for the collections, but it's also sustainable for future reference. Which brings me to my second case, the city of Kortrijk, Utrecht. Not far away from Wiper. So you have a region where this idea of working together to find a storage solution was very hot back in the day. It's also on the outskirts of the town, but not that far away. And you can find a link to some more information over there. It was bigger, 5,000 square meters, divided over 2 floors. It had a total of 3,600 square meters storage capacity, again, for the city and the region. But here they also wanted to include the archive of the city. So it's like a concept 2.0 if you compare it to the first one. It had this archival collection added to it. And then you see some dazzling figures, just to give you an idea that there was a lot of room specifically designed for particular collections. I would just like to add that the ASHRAE climate for Yper was B for the entire building. And here in Kortrijk, they made a combination of some ASHRAE B storage rooms, but there's also AA for specific vulnerable collections provided. Here you can see some additional information. I think it's, I shouldn't go through this line by line, but it gives you an idea of what was realized. It was a bit more expensive because you had this whole archive that had to be added on top of the original concept. But you see a good division between several partners that took on the financial challenges. It opened in spring 2018. So I'm already going to my conclusions, lessons learned. It is my experience that an opportunity to design and build storage infrastructure in Flanders, it only comes by every 30 years or so in a specific area. So it's an opportunity you need to grasp, I feel. It does require a fair degree of knowledge on existing concepts. I mean, you need to study a bit, and it isn't easily financed, as I've mentioned before. But if you get it carried by several organizations who want to cooperate, I think you take a very big step. And you always need a very clear picture on the future return on investment. I want to clarify myself on that. If you have, for instance, a local government, they can often ask you, why should we invest in this kind of infrastructure? And then you need to draw them the picture of the next 30 years of energy saving and what that means for their budget in the future. I feel that patience and resilience in all these kinds of projects is of the essence, because you easily talk about 5, 6, 7 years of having meetings and frustrations and then new opportunities, but it's worth the effort. And I think you also need the courage to decide on what kind of climate you really want to have for your collection. Know infrastructure concept is helped by hesitation from the sides of the people taking care of the collections. You should be able to put a stamp on it. For instance, an ASHRAE letter or class. There are aspects of sustainability that I see coming back through these both examples. There's an aspect of ecological sustainability. For instance, you have one building that we use for different users. That means that you don't have a lot of small buildings everywhere, scattered everywhere. So you might say it saves some space that is left unbuilt. It's always near a city, so your transportation is within limits. And this concept of low energy storage facilities, it's really based on minimal technology, minimal use of energy, which is a very good news for your maintenance costs, but it also reduces your greenhouse gas emissions now, but for all those years in the future as well. There's economical sustainability in the way that you save on energy, staff, transport. You have many shoulders to divide the burden, and you build local experience with new concepts. So there's an aspect of innovation that you bring into your own community rather than you just pay somebody from abroad to do this effort for you. And I feel there's also a social aspect in these kinds of storage facilities because work stays regional. You don't get collections outside of a region to bring it to one gigantic storage facility. No, there's still an element of work-life balance that local people can work with their collections not that far away. And it sort of supports your local economy and thus it supports local life. And so that's how I would like to conclude. I feel that the future is now when we were developing both of these cases and we were building them. Sustainability, it seems strange right now, but we thought it was a nice to have. We thought this is an opportunity, this is a challenge. And everybody involved wanted to try these new concepts that we had learned from the Danish colleagues. There was a briefly additional funding, so we grasped that opportunity. And the real primal issue was cooperation between institutions. That was our main goal. But within less than a decade, sustainability is primal and it's a real must-have. And this low energy proved crucial also during the last winter when we had our big energy crisis in Europe. Because of this, ITER and Kortrijk attract more and more of attention from people interested in these concepts. So this is my conclusion. When you get the opportunity to design these kinds of infrastructures or to help designing them, don't hesitate. The next opportunity might be only after you retire. And I think you need to grasp the opportunity to learn from it. It's hard, I won't deny it, but I think it's part of our job. And it's not really like not trying is an option for us at the current moment. And before you know it, I mean, you can make mistakes and you can forget. We always forget one or two things when we're designing storage facilities, but I really think you're shaping the future in doing so. Thank you very much.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Wouter. It's just so inspiring to see these types of examples. And, I had the great fortune of going to visit the low energy storage facilities in Vejle. And I know that, in Denmark, there's a lot of work towards this, and also in the Netherlands, as you mentioned, and it's really exciting to see the collaboration happening. We do have a couple of questions, but I'm going to exercise my moderator power and ask one first, if that's okay. I was wondering if you could tell us anything about the energy consumption data at these places. I mean, when I was in Violet, they mentioned that it was 90% or over 90% more energy efficient than traditional storage facilities. I don't know if you had similar data you might be willing to share.
I don't know them by heart, but we worked on the findings of Vejle and of the Nationalmuseet in Denmark. We had a number of scenarios for the ITER storage facility calculated in advance. I can't really answer your question, but I might raised the issue, I think, is related to it, that before building, you can let people calculate if it's interesting to add an extra 2 or 3 centimeters of insulation on the outer part of your building or not, what that would do with your energy and your temperature curve throughout the year. So I think that the colleagues in Ypres, they found that they had one store for weaponry, and that had to be kept more cool. And they felt that the original energy concept had to be added on with a small, with a little bit of extra cooling for this one room. But the total rest is the rest of the building works just as promised before.
That's very cool. That's very cool. Well, I think it's always inspiring to also think a little bit about incorporating sustainability into the design phase. And so often storage facilities, but even more so museums, are designed without thinking or knowing what climate you want. And I think that that was a really important aspect that I just wanted to reiterate. Once again, we do have a couple of questions coming in, and I think one of the big things that we're curious about is whether or not there are any issues with rising damp or risk of flooding because we don't have the ground floor being insulated. So how do you manage that? Is it just a matter of finding a low water risk site, or is there anything else that can be designed into the buildings to mitigate this risk?
There's dehumidification, so any damp within the building is tackled by that technical addition. Well, protection against flooding was mentioned before we started building, but it's actually in Ypres, it's quite close to a small, I wouldn't say river, but I don't know the exact word in English, but there's no real issues with groundwater coming up to. There's a big layer of gravel underneath the concrete floor, and it's high enough. So, of course, it's not built in the lowest part of the of the surroundings. The location proved to be just fine to tackle these problems.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So once again, it sounds like it's really about finding a collaborative approach and having all of these considerations in mind from the beginning. So understanding that these are the types of risks that we want to be able to mitigate and think about and acknowledge. And these are the types of considerations and functionality of what we want our building to be able to achieve and how we want it to perform. So for anyone who's a conservator in the audience, I would very much like to encourage you to use this story as a basically some ammo for inserting yourself into conversations. If you have an expansion project, if you are building a storage facility, or if you are going to be part of a new museum, then please be part of that conversation. It is really important for us to make sure that we have a seat at the table. So thank you so much, Wouter, for that. It's really, really interesting. We had one more question, and I feel like this could actually be a webinar within of itself. But regarding the funding, the question is, do you find that humanities-focused organizations are starting to fund greener storage solutions, or does it make more sense to seek funding from environmentally focused funders?
Can you repeat the question? I don't understand.
Yeah,
it really.
sorry. I don't know if you have an answer for that. And once again, this may be something that we get into a little bit later. But in terms of the funding, because the funding was partnered with the government, and I guess maybe this is a way to ask this question, was the branch of the government you partnered with part of the humanities world, or was it part of the sustainability and environment world? Because I know that often those are two separate things.
It was originally part of the humanities world. So we were talking about how to improve the storage of cultural heritage. So that was the focus. And then the idea was we cannot build all these small kinds of very high quality storages for everybody in themselves. They need to work together. But in doing so, I think a big step was taken towards towards a more sustainable way of storing our heritage in a safe way, because we incorporated this low energy concept. You could do it just as well with a lot of extra energy if you're just thinking about the cultural heritage. But this solution proved to be successful in both fields.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's really exciting, and I love that question. So I know it's a little bit of a different question than what we were talking about in terms of energy, but I think it's really important for us to be open to both paths. I know that about 10 years ago, when you would go to the cultural people, they would say, sorry, we don't do sustainability. And you go to the sustainability people and they'd say, sorry, we don't do culture. But it's really important for us to be advocating on both sides. You know, advocate for sustainability to be part of the cultural conversation, and advocate for culture to be part of the sustainability conversation. So it's really exciting to see success stories. And the other thing for everyone is use these success stories as examples of what you'd like to achieve. So once again, this is why we're so excited to share this with you all today. And a huge thank you to Wouter for joining us today and for the incredible work that you guys have been doing. It's obviously been a huge pleasure. I'm going to remove the spotlight and we'll say hi to everybody again. It's a huge pleasure to be able to continue to work with FARO and supporting sustainability within Belgium. If you'd like more information about our sustainability and culture program, I've dropped a link in the chat where you can check out the deck. Of course, feel free to get in touch. So we mentioned Vejle, we mentioned Denmark, so now we're going to travel up north, and we are joined today by two of our colleagues from the Stadsmuseum for Kunst, which is the Danish National Gallery, and it is Pil Rasmussen and Thor Nørmark-Larsen, who are going to be joining us from the Danish Climate Control Pilot. And I just wanted to mention very briefly about the pilot before we get rolling here, because this is a really special program, and I just want to acknowledge the incredible courage that our colleagues at SMK and all over Denmark have taken in trying out this venture and leading the way in the climate control update conversation. As I mentioned, after the International Climate Control Conference in December of 2022, we launched our programming to actually help institutions implement sustainability actions and upgrade their climate control. And we partnered first with the Danish Museum Association, which was incredibly exciting because not only were we able to work with 10 member museums to establish a methodology for implementing more environmentally friendly and better collections care practices, but also able to look at collective action and how we can bring this to museums all over Denmark. So the goal of the program is that we're working with 10 pilot museums to help establish a methodology, and then we're working with the Danish Museum Association to tailor this to the Danish context so we can bring it to every museum in Denmark. We're going to talk a little bit later about loan agreements and collective action there, but you guys aren't here to hear me. You're here to hear Thor and Pil. So I'd love to invite you both. I'm going to spotlight you guys, and I would love to hear a little bit about your journey in the climate control program, and especially what you guys are doing to update your climate control conditions. So Pil, maybe I can let you kick off.
Definitely. Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you for inviting us for this. We're very happy to be here. We don't have a whole presentation, so it will be a little bit more sort of free-flowing. I hope that's okay with this seminar sort of concept. But also just to expand a little bit about my own background before I get into it. So I'm a trained paintings conservator originally, and I've been working for almost 20 years in kind of more collections management in different aspects. So art handling, registration of collections, outgoing loans, exhibition production, preservation plans, and then I got into more kind of staff management, budgets, all of this stuff. So I have hands-on experience with paintings conservation, but it's been mostly about managing collections in a broader sense. So getting into this program with you in Key Futures, which we're very happy about as well, we had already gone by the BSO guidelines for, I think it's more than 10 years now. So 40 to 60% relative humidity and 16 to 25 degrees Celsius, and allowing for kind of annual fluctuations within this range. We have the 4 different seasons in Denmark, so it made sense to kind of adjust the settings of our HVAC units accordingly over the flow of the year. So we have been doing that already for our own collection. And I know Thor will touch a little bit upon the next step after this, because in recent years, I think 5 to 6 years ago, we also started to try to implement the BSO guidelines for our incoming loans, which is a little bit more difficult, obviously, because the loan conditions can be different. So coming into this program, or this pilot program, as it were, we have started experimenting with specifically shutting down the HVAC units. So what we've done is we've chosen some test areas, and one of them is a suite of 5 rooms, kind of varying in height and size, but they are connected by open doorways, and they are serviced by the same HVAC unit. So this is one of the test areas, and the other one is a storage unit that also is run by its own HVAC unit. And the idea is to try to do nightly shutdowns of the units and see what happens. So obviously we started out in a very controlled way with a 3-hour shutdown during the day when everyone was at work and ready to start it up again if we saw any issues. We didn't, and then we moved on to a 6-hour cycle, and there were not much to see. There was not much to see, and we then tested the nightly shutdown for a full 12 hours. Obviously, the idea with this is to also try and see in the Danish climate what are the outdoor conditions in which we can do this and still be within the safe limits that we want to be. So we've done 1 test, as I mentioned, and we have 3 more planned before the end of the pilot program, which is at the end of this year. And right now, we don't have any energy savings calculations or anything like that to share with you, but we will have at the end of the program. What I can tell you is that absolutely nothing happened at the time when we tested. It was just like a slight curve to the line, but maybe 2 degrees Celsius, something like that. So it was very minimal, and this was during kind of a cold winter day. It wasn't frosty weather, but it was kind of cold outside. So we're hopeful that we can do this, at least in those conditions. We're also going to test when it's warmer and more humid. What happens then? Can we still maintain the conditions we want? And obviously the interesting part is also what are the savings then? Because you also close down your HVAC unit and start it up again. And how does that balance out? Kind of how long do you have to have it turned off for it to make sense? And for this, I will come to the second point of being a partner in this, because it was also a great opportunity for us to connect with our facilities management staff around how the HVAC units are run. Now, when we first started with the BSO guidelines, we had kind of in-house technicians that were part of the staff at SMK. And some years ago, this kind of expertise was transferred to the Agency for Culture and Castles here in Denmark. So that means we have like an external agency doing the facilities management for our buildings. And obviously that also comes with a lot of questions of who decides how to do it, who decides how to spend each other's time. If I want to involve them in a conversation, I'm also taking their time for something that we would like to do as a museum. Obviously they're interested, but we are all pressed for time. So getting that kind of space to talk to each other, that has been a great opportunity for us to be able to set aside the time. Yeah, I'm really hopeful also for the collaboration with them going forward after this program because of this. Then I want to mention that we are also starting to look into some of the dilemmas that you naturally face when you get into something like this. One of those might be the kind of long-term preservation aspects of it. So the time-weighted preservation index, for those of you who are conservators will know this. So kind of a measurement for chemical degradation rates, basically based on the level of humidity and the level of temperature. Now, in our building, what we found is that we're relatively high in these kind of BSO framework. So we're closer to the 25 than we are to the 16. And this means that we get a sort of poor TWPI rating. And now, while the TWPI has its kind of limitations in what it actually can speak about, so to say, you still can use it as kind of an indicator of where you're at. So what we're looking into now is, are we actually spending energy or using energy in getting the temperature up for the sake of visitors, for instance, in our exhibition spaces? Or would we actually use more energy cooling down to a preferred level of temperature? So it's also started a different kind of conversation at the museum about what the dilemmas are in working with sustainability, because there's no doubt that our management would like us to be more sustainable. And what I'm trying to work with, and I know Thor is as well, is how do we translate that into the sort of low-key practical aspects of how we work? What does it mean to be a conservator in this context? How do we translate that into different ways of handling our work on an everyday basis? So it could also be about our events. I mean, as many museums, we also are more and more open to the public. We have events with music, we have people coming in, we have something called SMK Fridays, where we have thousands of visitors in one day, in one afternoon, actually. And what does this mean? That means you also have a peak at certain times of the day when you suddenly have many people in the room. Now our HVAC unit can handle it, no doubt, but what does it mean for the energy consumption, that it suddenly has to buffer a whole different kind of indoor environment with moisture and heat being exuded from the visitors? So there's a lot of dilemmas in this as well, in being open and accessible and opening your collection for use, and also being energy efficient in the same way. So we're trying to balance these things out against each other and taking the time for it. Now, the last thing I want to mention before handing over to Thor is we also talk a lot about risk willingness and how we make decisions, which I think is a really interesting part of this. Because one thing is also sort of practical stuff that you can do, or you can turn the knob, or you can turn it off, or whatever. But a lot of this also comes down to how we decide what's necessary. So for us, for instance, we've only had an HVAC unit for the past, I don't know, since the 60s. So you know, our collection spans 700 years of art. So what does that mean? Had we done a TWPI calculation for the collection 200 years ago, it would say it wouldn't be here anymore, but it's still here. So obviously, some parts of the collection can take more, and I know research also shows this. So for us, it's also an opportunity to think about the standards that we're abiding to. So even the standards that came before BSO guidelines or whatever else updated guidelines we have were still standards. So it was kind of an attempt at a one-size-fits-all. And you can do that with a collection, but maybe it could be a different size that fits all. Who says that it has to be that size? And in any case, you have always had more fragile objects that you would need to treat differently in any case. So we're looking at maybe we can change from this standard to this standard that is more energy, sort of not efficient, but saving at least. And then thinking about maybe the smaller parts of the collection that we need to treat differently, and how can we do that instead? Because I think as conservators, we're trained to be very risk adverse, I would say. So we don't like to take risks. If somebody asks us, you know, what should we do here? And you think, maybe something will happen, I'm gonna err on the side of safety and say, no, that's not a good idea. And maybe, as Wouter was also kind of touching upon, maybe it's time we need to think differently about these things, because it's not really sustainable necessarily, and not for our own use of resources either as staff at a museum. So we're talking a lot about how how are we willing to take risks that we're not sure if it will be okay, but we have to risk it because overall it's better for the environment, for our collection, whatever. And also, I think for just how we use the sparse resources that we do have, because I think all museums have experienced cutbacks in recent years, and it's can we spend so much time and energy on these few objects and how we handle them when we can do something more overall that benefits the whole collection, and then kind of trust that that works, and then go back to the few objects that are fragile and spend a little bit more time on them again. So it's kind of, how do we as conservators trust that it's okay to make a decision that maybe in 100 years you will see a slight change, but we don't know, and we won't live long enough to know either. So while I am advocating for the longest possible life of our collections, I'm also recognizing at the present moment that we need to also reconsider. So
I will just jump
Thank
in
you so
here,
much,
I think.
Yeah, go ahead, Thor, please.
Great. Hi, I'm Thor Nørmark-Larsen. I'm the head registrar at SMK. My way into these questions was through a colleague from Getty Conservation Institute, Joel Taylor, who had some meetings at our museum where he had some very open questions about our procedures as registrars. And during those conversations, we really opened up this area of the procedures we are leading in museums, and how we also identified how different professional branches of the museum operate and look at a situation in different ways. So one of the findings, I think, was exactly the dilemma of having a conservation staff often actually accepting the BISO climate regulations more or less. And then you had a staff of registrars that were handling the loan agreements and so on. And they were often not updated on what we would accept. So we actually had a situation where we had loan agreements stating that we wanted to follow the classical range. And we knew that our own collections were all often, had difficulties actually following these requirements. But in our outgoing loan contracts, we had that stated as a non-negotiable parameter. So a couple of years ago, as Pil mentioned, we already in our own collection started these wider ranges many years ago. But only a couple of years ago, we then changed it on outgoing loan contracts, because we became aware we are actually asking something else that we are actually using in our own collection, and that's just not fair. So that was first step. And what we did was simply just mentioning in our loan agreements that we do follow the BISO requirements, that we always have a conservator's eyes on the object to see if it's safe to follow these ranges, or if we need to find some other solution like a microclimate frame or showcase and so. So that was actually the easy step to mention that in our own loan agreement. It could be a difficult step because, I mean, not a lot of museums did that at that time. I think more and more museums are now changing the loan agreements very, very luckily. But we now started the more difficult path, and that is also changing the conditions on our incoming loans exhibitions, our temporary exhibitions. And while we are able to proceed with the classical range, and we actually do for a little while yet, I have started to ask everybody to be willing to accept the BISO climate requirements on exhibitions. And the interesting part was, I thought this is going to be a really tough and impossible challenge. But actually, to my surprise, everybody accepted. So, I mean, it's been so few institutions that actually said, okay, this is problematic for us. So I think it's about just starting the conversation and starting to get out there and posing the questions and see if we can get everybody along on this. I mean, one of the realities we are facing as registrars is also this amount of work we used to be spending on sending climate graphs forth and back between institutions. And whenever there was a tiny little hiccup on the graph, it was just you needed to explain why did that happen and what was the reason for this. And then diving deeper into that question, I mean, it just became obvious for me that, I mean, in many ways, it is a myth. The perfect climate is a myth in some ways, at least the classical climate, because I mean, yes, you will be able to send graphs forth and back and have a very straight line just saying this is relative humidity, it's wonderful, and so on. But I mean, it became more and more clear that it depends on where you're measuring this climate. Are you measuring it in the, in the channel where the air comes out? Are you measuring it where the works are hanging? Are you measuring it, in what height are you measuring this? I mean, if you have a group of people coming in from a rainy day and they are standing in front of a painting, I can guarantee you it's not 50 plus minus 5% relative humidity. And it's just about also understanding what are we asking from each other and why are we spending each other's time on this? I mean, if science says, as it does, or suggests at least, that it's relatively safe to accept a wider range, then why are we spending each other's resources? I mean, we have limited times as registrars and other professionals, so why don't we work more efficiently and try to work on, exactly as Pete mentioned, the objects that are actually difficult. I mean, there are objects in every collection that would be safer in a more controlled climate range. And then let's focus on microclimate solutions, or maybe accepting that work can simply not travel. That could be another solution. So that was just my little first thing. I think what I also learned from this is to have this holistic view on an outgoing loan. I mean, we need the conservator's view, we need the registrars, we need security, but it's often not enough to just look from one perspective. I mean, we need to approach this in an open-minded manner and try to see what are the challenges from the different perspectives, and then be a little risk acceptant. We need to accept a certain amount of risk if we want to change things. And of course, we should not just tune up the heat to a crazy level or open the doors on a rainy day and so on. But I mean, within a certain limits, I think we are relatively safe, and so does science suggest. So I have tried to often also mention a lot of other institutions when I have these conversations with people, saying these big institutions in Europe, in US, wherever it is, are actually accepting these. The conservation institutes, and then I mentioned a couple of names, are accepting this. So you can be relatively safe that this is okay. And you need to be empowered as a museum professional, as a registrar, as a conservator, to be willing to accept this kind of risk. We're not gambling with our collections by taking that risk. It's a calculated risk, and we need to do it. As Wouter very cleverly said, not trying is no longer a solution. I think that was a really nice statement. And I think we need to take that risk. We don't need to be stupid about it, but we can actually move forward together and do it in a good and safe way. I think that was pretty much what I want to say.
Brilliant. Thank you, Thor. And you already answered the questions that we're getting in the chat about, how are people reacting to this from the loan side? And I love what you guys are talking about here with this collaboration and communication. It's, updating climate control is, like Wouter was saying earlier, it's a collective effort. Everybody needs to be on board. Everybody needs to be on the same page. You know, it's a cross-departmental effort. We need to be getting our conservators to sit down at the same table with our facilities team and make sure the registrars and curators and everybody is part of this conversation. And I have to say that for me, this has been one of the most exciting things that I've seen in the pilot, is how everyone at the various institutions have been able to come together and work together to achieve a lot of successful savings. And it's just a huge honor to have you guys part of this program. So once again, if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask, please feel free to do that. I did just want to mention, for anyone who is not familiar with BISO, the BISO Green Protocol is basically a protocol that outlines more sustainable practices, both for climate control and for transportation. And I have popped a link in the chat with the BISO refresh specifically related to climate control, which was published in December of 2023. And one of the really exciting things that we've seen there is that, as Peter was saying, you know, it's moving away from this one size fits all, and it's moving towards more bespoke conditions for our collections. And I think that, you know, this is what this conversation is about. It's, you know, having these more holistic views, not only on how we are approaching preservation practices, but also how we're using our budgets and our resources. We all feel strapped for time, but at the end of the day, it's just about where we're putting that time and where we're putting that money. And, you know, I talked to a lot of people about updating climate control, and, oh, well, it's, you know, maybe we don't have the budget for it. And it's like, well, take the money out of your savings. I mean, look at Guggenheim Bilbao. They saved 20,000 euro a month on their energy by going from ±2 to ±5. So it's really exciting to see how much impact this can have. And Peel, I was wondering if you would tell us a little bit, because we had this chat in our last meeting, when it came to the HVAC system shutdowns, because I know that you said you started with 3 hours and then you went to 6 hours and then you went to 12 hours. Did you see an advantage to having longer shutdowns? I mean, you would think like that would have more energy saving, but I was wondering if there were any, what the takeaway was, or what maybe the game plan is for moving forward. Are you going to be pulling back to 6 hours? Are you excited with 12? What were some of the takeaways there?
Yeah, I mean, I think since we saw so little change, we decided to just go ahead with 12 hours next time, there's no reason to go through the shorter ones. We would rather have more cycles of shutdown in that case, and spend the time on that instead, and see maybe different weather conditions that we can get more information about that. But I don't think, I mean, what we're considering is if there is a certain level of energy consumption to starting up the unit again. Mm-hmm. So I guess there's probably a kind of a breaking point as to when it makes sense and when it doesn't. And we haven't really experimented with that, but that would actually be interesting to do. What we have considered is that we're also a museum that 1 day a week we have longer opening hours. And then, as I mentioned, we have these special events where we also have longer opening hours. We rent out certain areas of the museum as well for external paying customers. So it's I think it's difficult to experiment with shutdowns without affecting too much of the going on in the museum if we do it in the daytime. So for that reason, just we decided to say that it's at night where we know everything is kind of quiet. And because it's at night, we would be able to take these longer periods of time in any case. Mm-hmm. So, but it would be interesting to know what the breaking point is. I also just want to mention that we are always open to having conversations about this with professionals wherever. So, and we'd love to talk more. You can sense both Thor and I can talk about this for a long time. So I think I will keep my email in the chat, and you're welcome to reach out if you have any questions. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Peel. And I think it's actually really exciting to see that there are so many opportunities for energy savings. I know that, you know, there are some institutions that maybe don't feel comfortable yet with expanding ranges or aren't ready to touch the RH and temperature. But you know, this proves that there are other things that you could start with. You know, I mean, you guys went the other way. You already implemented BISO, and now you're looking at HVAC shutdowns. But that's also an option, is to look at, you know, adjusting your facilities as a really exciting opportunity for energy savings. And then you can take it a step further and look at the ranges. And of course, this is the other thing, of course, is that it depends. It depends on your collection. It depends on your building. It depends on what the needs of the collection are. It depends on the capacities of your facilities. You know, I was very fortunate to come visit you guys in Denmark in November, as well as your colleagues at our other participating museums. And each case is different. And I think it's exciting because we have so many examples of really positive success stories and really exciting savings, but it also can feel a little bit daunting sometimes to be like, well, what is applicable to me? So this is where this collective action, I think, comes in so much into play. And of course, as Thor was talking about with loan agreements, and I just love what you were saying, Thor, about, you know, flipping the language of loan agreements, especially outgoing loan agreements, not saying, okay, we require that you keep X, Y, and Z standards, but instead saying, well, our current practices are BISO. So we would like you to have something similar so that we can make sure that the collections aren't, you know, experiencing anything dramatic. So maybe you could say a word or two about that, and what that means for how we are going to be doing loans in the future.
Absolutely. I think it's a very good question, because I mean, in theory, I mean, we should try to look at the object, see what is safe for the object, in what condition is the normal range for this object, and when we lend it out, we would like something similar. I mean, in reality, I think the reason why the classical range was so successful, the 50 plus minus 5, was it was easy to remember. It was easy to just accept this is the range. Everybody knows it. Everybody tries to follow it. And I think maybe the way I think most conservators think is the object should be in a pretty similar situation as what it is in the collection when we lend it out, within, you know, some small ranges, or now bigger ranges. But I actually think as for registrars, the way of thinking, it's easy to then, I mean, to step into that little tricky situation that we just replace the 50 plus minus 5 with 40 to 60 plus minus 10, because we don't have the time to look into every single object in the same way when we have so many objects going forth and back. So actually, I think our situation is also that we will take the risk and say yes, but you know, most works are pretty safe in this. And if we do the slow acclimatization of the works when we lend out, this is a fair way to go about it. I mean, if people still follow 50 plus minus 5, that's okay. But please know that it's okay to be a little easier going about the ranges. And it's also simply a question about generosity. I mean, we might not be able to do all the adjustment of our system as we want, but maybe our colleagues abroad are able to do so. And then why don't we save that energy in France or in the States or wherever? So it's also about some kind of open willingness to say, let's do this together. We're not an island. We have to do it together. So if Wouter is able to have a saving in his system, let's benefit from that. So I think that's my approach, at least.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I think there's so many exciting things, just opening up these conversations about loan agreements and a little bit more transparency about what's going on and what the realities are. I mean, as you mentioned that there was a situation where you had implemented BISO in the museum, which is, you know, the plus or minus 10 range, but that was not yet translated into the loan agreements. And I know that I've seen a lot of institutions that have much stricter standards in their loan agreements than they do in their practice. And that can be inhibiting for institutions who are borrow objects from maybe larger institutions and feel that they can't update their climate control because this other museum requires X, Y, and Z, and so they have to maintain those standards. So you know, often it just comes down to a conversation. And one thing that I think is really important to iterate here, and we're going to be continuing to explore this topic of loan agreements with our next panelist, is, you know, that loan agreements are contracts which are not set in stone. They are, as my friends at Mishcon, the law art firm in the UK, always say, contracts are a jumping off point for negotiations. And I just think that is such a brilliant way to put that, you know, we can talk about this. So yeah, I'm just really excited to hear that these conversations are happening. And, you know, a huge thank you to you both for all of your leadership in this space and for your willingness to share. I know we're running a little behind on time here. And I feel like we could talk about this for another 2 hours. So we might have to have a second session. And of course, as you all know, we will be having a part 2 of the International Climate Control Conference, where our Danish cohort will be presenting their findings this December, as well as our other colleagues from additional cohorts are going to be presenting their case studies. So we're really looking forward to welcoming you back there. So a huge thank you so much to Pile and Thor for your time, for your leadership, and for all of your insights. This is such exciting conversations, and I look forward to continuing those. And but right now, what I'd love to do is invite my colleague, Melissa, to the stage. So I'm going to unpin and repin here. And really excited to continue this topic of loan agreements. Basically, as I've mentioned, the Climate Control Pilot is a program designed to help walk museums through the process of updating their climate control. So each participating institution works with 2 coaches. One is a preventive conservation professional, and the other is a facilities and energy efficiency specialist. And they are guided through a curated program, including training, as well as the coaching and workshops to update climate control practices and loan agreements. As we know, this can feel scary to do on your own, so it's always helpful to have some support from leading experts around the globe. And as Pile and Thor talked about, you know, collective action and seeing how your colleagues are handling this around the world is just able to relieve that risk adverseness that is jammed into us during our training, to open up a lot of doors, not only for conversation, but for inspiration. And after we launched the successful pilot in Denmark, we opened up the climate control program to additional participants from around the globe. And it was our pleasure to launch a cohort in North America that included the Royal Ontario Museum, where Melissa is from, and we'll be sharing in just a moment. And we're now launching additional cohorts. So we are really excited to announce that we will have a cohort launching with the Swedish Museum Association in Sweden, as well as a cohort in France in collaboration with ICOM France. We're in conversations with the German Museum Association, as well as the Canadian Museum Association and several others. So the program is proven, it's ready to rock and roll. If you'd like to get involved, please do contact me, let me know, and I'm happy to have continued conversations. But I asked Melissa here today because we had our first workshop on loan agreements a few weeks ago in our North American cohort. And I was so impressed by the way the ROM is approaching loan agreements. And I thought that this is something that we can all be inspired from, learn from for sustainable practices. So Melissa, I would love to ask you if you'd like to share with us a little bit. And then I have a few questions I've prepared. So we'll do a little bit of an interview style conversation, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. No, for sure. Thank you, Caitlin. And I think what I'm about to say is going to echo a lot of what was just being discussed with Thor and Pile. So this is just a continuation of that, and also a little snapshot of what our outgoing loan process is at the ROM. So I'll just share my screen. And I just have a few slides. So thank you, people. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around for this extra time. So let me know if everybody sees that. Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Thanks. So as Caitlin was just saying, my name is Melissa Maltby, and I'm a registrar at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, Canada. I'm one of the registrars whose primary focus is outgoing loans. So I'm pretty happy. I'm happy to be speaking about this process on behalf of my colleagues at the ROM, many of whom are on the call today. So hi, everybody. So it's a process that we're very happy about. It's been developed and refined over the years by my colleagues at the ROM. And it's a very smooth, well-oiled process. So again, I'm very happy to be speaking about it. Some of you may find this process familiar with what you're doing. And if it is new to you, again, I'm happy to connect with anyone after this call. I could also share my contact information. I'm happy to speak more about what we're doing at the ROM to implement with what you're doing at your institution. So it's just a couple slides. So I just wanted to outline just our steps in a snapshot, a very quick snapshot, just to help you understand how we do it. So when a loan request is received, a registrar is assigned, and then the registrar then responds to the potential borrower, and that's when we inform them of our standard loan conditions. And then at that point, we let them know that the interview review process is beginning. And that is when we let them know that a dialogue is now going to be taking place between both institutions. And not only is it between both institutions, but it's also within the ROM. So we have a robust loan team. We have and a team of amazing conservation, a conservation department with amazing conservators, amazing preparators. We have a logistics coordinator who consults on shipping. We also have a head of risk management who is also part of that loan team. So we have many people involved in the process within the museum who work together collaboratively to make that loan happen. And so those discussions and those questions and recommendations then get talked about internally, and then that gets transferred to our borrower, and then that's when the dialogue takes place. So this is just another quick snapshot of that actual internal review process. So once a loan gets curatorial approval, then we let the borrower know that our conservation assessment is taking place. And that is an individualized, holistic look at the objects or object in question. So our conservators are, of course, looking at the object's condition, its history, its treatment history, its material and makeup. And then from there, they have tailored individual conservation requirements for the object or objects in question. So after that, our preparators also then take a look at the request. They go over what mounting needs to be done, framing, and then a packing and crating assessment. And we reuse our crates and frames as often as possible. We only purchase new frames and crates when absolutely necessary. So we do reuse a lot, and that's when they make that assessment on how things can be reused at that point in time. And then the entire team also reviews the facility. And so that's when we get the facility report from the borrower, where we take a look at what it is they can achieve and what they've achieved historically. That's, of course, what Thor mentioned earlier, where we ask for the environmental charts and we see what they've done from a similar point in time from the year prior, and also where they're borrowing from. Where is this object going? What is the ambient temperature like in this location? From there, we also review their design proposal, and this is looking at display case materials, elevations, floor plans. Are there any giant windows going to the outside right in front of our objects, or are we right by an external exit? We look at all of that at this point. And that's when our conservators will go back to what their assessment was for the object, and they'll say, well, hey, maybe a microclimate is most necessary. We've done even 2D microclimates in framed 2D paintings, or microclimates within display cases if they're sealed and gasketed. So we figure out what is most appropriate. And this is, of course, always based on what is achievable from the borrower. So if we see that they don't have as robust an HVAC system, they have just ambient that we're working with, again, we will try to see where we can be most flexible and tailor it for each object. And we have a conversation with them, and we make recommendations on how it is we can help them improve their facility. We've even, just going into the security part next, I was working with a borrower before where there was an issue with their security, and we actually made a recommendation on finding motion sensor security alarms. And so they went and roped it into their next fiscal budget. And so they actually ended up with an improved facility after the conversation that we were having. So We've done that for smaller institutions and cultural centers who need help with their environment as well if a microclimate can't be achieved. So we really have those kinds of conversations and see what we can do. So the security and risk assessment is also included in that. Is it an enclosed and locked display case if necessary? Do we need an alarmed display case? What is their fire prevention protocols? What's their overall building security? So that's looked at as well, and that's also signed off on. And then of course we go into logistics coordination, approval, shipment details. Can our pieces be roped into a shuttle and grouped with other pieces to save on emissions from trucks? What couriers? We look at a courier assessment. Does an on-site courier need to be there, or can a virtual courier be in place? Or are we satisfied with the professionals who are at that facility? And then we gather as many costs as possible, and we go over those with the borrower, and they approve them before we begin anything, including the packing and crating. And then registration, we give our approval. We talk about insurance. If they need assistance with that as well, we would help them out with what is required there, and any other permits and requirements that we may need, such as immunity from seizure, etc. So this is all happening over the course of, well, you could see why we ask for a minimum of 12 months in advance, because it is such a long and lengthy and detailed process between all of our departments here at the ROM, because it is tailored for each individual object loan request. So once everything has been discussed and agreed upon between the ROM and the borrower, and of course internally at the ROM, only then is the loan agreement issued. And so before the loan agreement is even issued, sometimes I will take the time to even give a summary of everything we've talked about so far. So, you know, this is what's going on. This is what we've agreed to. This is what you've indicated that you can achieve based on our conversations between ROM conservation and them and our preparators. Everyone is on the same page. And then the loan agreement is issued. And you really, at that point, aren't surprised by anything you're seeing in the loan agreement, because this is something we've already talked about and discussed over the months prior. So at that point, I was talking to my colleagues about this earlier this week, or last week, and sometimes a loan agreement can be signed in a day at that point, because there's nothing new that you're reviewing here. It's all everything that you've agreed upon, and the borrower is comfortable with what they're doing, and we at the ROM are comfortable with what we're doing as well. And with that, I'll just add that we do try to be as flexible as possible. I mean, obviously object safety is our priority, but it's quite rare for a loan not to happen. As Thor was mentioning earlier, if an object is far too delicate or in poor condition, perhaps we can suggest an alternative object that is in better condition, or if a microclimate can take place, we'll go with that. Or sometimes even if we can't swap out an object, we'll send a high resolution file of a photograph of the object, which they can then reproduce to still be included in their exhibition. We've had people reproduce, pictures on the full size of their wall in place of sending the actual object if it is really too risky to send, if it's just not suitable. But that is pretty rare. We do try to do as much as we can to make a loan happen, and that is working with the borrower, talking to the borrower, having a dialogue between the two parties and our internal loan team here to make it happen. So that's the end of my presentation there. So I'll just stop sharing. So that's a super quick snapshot of like 12 months of work between so many people, but we really do try our best to have the most successful outcome, because we're all in the same team. This is our job, which what Wouter mentioned earlier with what he was talking about is it's our job to be advocates for the collections, and we really do want to see them be engaged in abroad and at other museums and galleries all over the world, right? So we really try to do our best to make that happen and work together at the end of the day.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Melissa. And I think everyone here will agree how inspiring it is. And there's so many points that I'd love to unpack here and delve into.
Yeah.
But the first one, and this is actually something that Thor had touched upon, is that, it's obviously best practice to be able to go through each individual object and figure out what the best required conditions are for those objects. And but I do know that that's quite time consuming, this bespoke care approach.
You need a team.
Yeah, exactly. And so what would you say to museums who might not have that kind of manpower, or large institutions that are doing, thousands of loans? I don't know if that's an exaggeration, but we're going to go with it.
Well, honestly, I think this kind of procedure, and I think it can take place regardless of the size of your institution or your cultural center or your gallery. If you're one of those collections managers, registrars, conservators who are wearing all the hats, and you're just one person and you're responsible for setting up your loan policy, I think it is still possible to set up a procedure similar to this, where you have different aspects that you're looking at that are customized for each loan request. One thing I would suggest is to limit the amount of loan requests that you can reasonably take on in a year. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Maybe limit to how many. Maybe we can only take on 3 to 5. Maybe we can only take on 10, or depending on what size of institution you are. The other thing I'll suggest is that there are lots of outside resources available as well. So in Canada, we have the Canadian Conservation Institute, CCI. So they have a lot of resources available to institutions, whether it's getting conservation guidance, accessing the expertise needed for a specific request or question, or you could even contract out a conservator to come and do an assessment on your object if needed, on a case-by-case basis, or perhaps contact a private conservator or local expertise in the area who are willing to help and answer your questions. So it is still achievable, I think, at the end of the day. If you don't have a team the size that we do, we're very fortunate to have the team that we do, but I think it's still achievable no matter the size of your institution. And again, you could always go with what your conditions are currently. If you're happy with what your ambient conditions are, perhaps that is what you will convey to your borrower.
Yeah, that's such a good point. But I really like this idea of, collaboration and sharing resources and supporting each other. And I know I've talked to you about this a lot, as well as several other members of our climate control program, that, it's about supporting each other. And if one institution doesn't have the resources in-house, they can always ask the partner institution or the borrowing or lender, whichever one, for help. And, I know that you've had a lot of experiences where you've helped guide smaller institutions through this process. And I saw that Fiona Graham is on the call. She's a preventive conservator consultant in Canada and does, amazing. Yeah, hi Fiona. Does amazing work, but she does a lot of this kind of thing where she can help support that. So you don't have to have an in-staff person to do that. But once again, this is about managing our resources, and
exactly.
it's going to be, worth it in the end to take the money that you're saving from having best practices for climate control conditions and all that energy savings. We're talking tens, if not hundreds of thousands of euros and dollars, all the currencies. And it's going to be such a small portion of that to be able to, hire Fiona to come in and help you assess what the needs are. And I know that you had talked about that could be done like jointly, like maybe bring someone in for one afternoon a month and go through all of the objects. So I love that there are solutions.
Right.
That always makes me
of course
really happy.
Definitely.
Yeah, fantastic. And this kind of goes into what we've been discussing within the context of the climate control pilot, is that a lot of times people see loan agreements as one of the biggest barriers for updating climate control. And what you had just said, and one thing that's always stuck with me about your approach, is that we're actually all on the same team here. Like, we all want this loan to happen. So
right.
Museum A and Museum B, they're not against each other. Like, we're all trying to make this work out. And so I think that just knowing that alleviates a lot of the fear of opening up transparent discussions and negotiations. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about making the loan work. So negotiating parameters, finding alternative solutions, supporting colleagues at other institutions. We all want to make a loan successful. What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Because it's always an open dialogue. people shouldn't be afraid to ask questions. People shouldn't be afraid to say, oh, well, why does it have to be as low as 50 lux for these paintings? You know, they may not understand why, they may not have seen what that looks like in practice. So whether that involves sharing pictures of past exhibitions that we've done at that low light level and to say, hey, actually, it does work to reduce your light levels to this amount. It's about kind of educating as much as possible. It's about answering as many questions as possible and really explaining why you're asking what you're asking for, and offering solutions and offering recommendations to a facility that might not have the resources that we do. So again, it's just about asking, it's about asking questions and explaining and educating as well, with no judgment ever, of course. We all want to achieve the same thing. We recognize that smaller institutions may not be able to do what we do. So again, that's why we do make those recommendations where needed. We explain where needed. We show where needed. I've invited people to come to see our exhibitions when it relates to a similar requirement that we're asking for on their end. And again, if we can help them actually improve their facility for future loan requests too, we would love to do that. We've recommended silica gel cassettes for microclimates to our borrowers. We've sent links. We share as much knowledge as possible so they can make that happen. But it's just about an open dialogue. So there's no surprises when you get to the loan agreement stage. If that answers your question. I have a lot of examples, but I'll stick with broad for now. Oh, I think you're muted, Kate.
I just want to listen to you talk. No, but I think this is exactly, you know, the crux of it, that, you know, when we come to loan agreements, you know, we can feel that they are so strict and there's no wiggle room. You know, I know that as a conservator, when I would see a loan agreement, I thought, you know, that's set in stone. That's a contract, which means it is non-negotiable. But as we've discussed and will continue to discuss, they're really, you know, just jumping off points for negotiation. And as we talked about with Thor, and I've mentioned a few times in the Danish cohort, we're looking at changing the practices so that lending institutions actually say what their practices are rather than making requirements. And this, of course, helps to open up that transparency about, you know, what people are doing. And I have to say, I'm sure that most people on this call are joining because they're really curious about what other institutions are doing. And as you and I have talked about, Melissa, you know, as registrars, you guys are really the only ones who know about practices at other institutions. A lot of conservators don't know what their colleagues are using. A lot of facilities managers don't. So I'm curious in terms of like opening up this conversation and facilitating more communication and understanding about what you know, practices people are using, what you know, loan parameters are looking like, and how we can get more comfortable communicating about this type of stuff. And you know, I think that some people might find that it's either scary or unprofessional to negotiate a loan. So how do we get more transparency around this? You know, is this something that we need to start internally and then look externally? What do you think about this idea of how do we take this to the next level?
I think that what you just said is probably the best answer to that is transparency, right? Is be as transparent as possible with why we're asking for what we are, and we can demonstrate how and when we can be flexible as well. So just keeping that dialogue as open as possible. And I know what you said earlier about registrars get to peer behind the curtain of other institutions, but also our conservation department is very much a part of that process. And we've even connected our registrar, our conservators directly to conservators at borrowers institutions, or whoever our primary contact is. If they really need to dive deeper into what our requirements are, we can connect people if needed directly. We can provide information and recommendations directly. So I think it's just about keeping that conversation open and knowing that there is no judgment. It is actually quite professional to negotiate a loan. It's the opposite. It's actually, it's better for everyone in the long run, and no one should be afraid to do that and to ask those questions. So if you're getting these requirements, these strict requirements from an institution, I think it's best if you ask questions and talk about it. And then I think that's the only way to be really successful in a loan, because then that will also promote honesty and transparency. Right. So, you know, that you might have an institution who might be afraid to say, well, they can't achieve that. And, you know, perhaps they'll think they can and they'll try, and then you could end up with a failure in a loan, right? So I think it's actually much better to be open and upfront at the beginning. That way you can really be successful that way, and everyone is happy in the end. It's transparency is just key in every aspect of what we do.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important. And I know that Peel and Thor and I have had these conversations as well. And Peel chimed in, you know, I think you also have to have the courage to be honest about
That's
your
right.
conditions,
That's right.
resources,
Yeah.
and background in these communications about loans.
Yeah.
And yeah, it does take a lot of courage. You know, it can
Courage
feel.
and sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead. I know I get all excited.
No, so do I. And I
So.
think it's courage, and because you have to have a certain amount of trust in each other as well. So trust is a big part of it,
Yes.
and you can only have trust if you're being open
Yes.
and transparent and talking without judgment, right? So
yeah. And I think that's such a good point, this idea of trust. And I know I was talking with a colleague, a conservator at one point, and I was saying, you know, why do we have to put numbers in our loan agreements? Why can't we just say, you know, like, oh, I trust that you'll take the best care of my collections, you'll treat them like their own. And one person said, well, I'm not sure I trust my colleagues to do that. And I was really surprised by that. But I think that once again, you know, this has to do with us building community. And I think that it's also, you know, because maybe we're not having these conversations, because maybe we are just looking at numbers in a book and then looking at, you know, the facilities report and not building those relationships or building that trust. I mean, I'd love to explore this a little bit more, but as we know, many loans do require facility reports, and that will determine the capacity of a borrower to safely take care of objects. So why are we relying on these reports? And maybe we can talk a little bit more about reports requiring more conversation. I mean, I had a colleague who told me that they had a facilities report once where it was, you know, they were really good about being steady. And then there was this huge, crazy spike, and then it went back down. And, you know, no one had any idea what happened, and everyone was freaking out about it. The alarms were going off. Turns out there was a tour guide who was standing right next to a data sensor, basically talking into the data sensor. So the humidity and temperature from this person's breath was causing this insane spike. I'd love to hear your thoughts about building trust, the importance of a facilities report, but maybe even more the importance about conversations around facilities reports and numbers.
That's right. Well, no, I mean, facility reports, they have so much, there's so much in there that you would not know to ask necessarily. So, you know, just to give you an example, we had a facility report for a lender or a borrower, sorry, where we realized, I think it was one of our preparators who were reviewing it said, well, actually, our crate isn't going to fit in their freight elevator. Like that's not, you know, you even look at the size of doorways and the size of elevators, and then you make your decisions based on that. So that's why that's all up front, right? You figure that all up at the front, so you don't have any surprises at the end. But yeah, in terms of their charts, we do ask questions too when we see those spikes. But as you know, our previous panelists were just talking about, I mean, maybe that's not the absolute end of the world if you ask and you talk about why that is. And I mean, this is the whole conversation about you know, opening up the very, very rigid, tight requirements that we would like to see in other institutions more and more. So that's something we're working on as we dive more into the Key Futures program with you guys. So, but yeah, but facility reports, I mean, I can't, yeah, there's so much information in there that you do need to see. And that's that's your starting point for your dialogue and your conversation with what you see in there and what you don't see in there. So you ask, you ask your questions.
Yeah, I think that's really important, is that once again, just like loan agreements, facilities reports are a starting point for conversations.
That's right.
And I have to say, it's also so interesting because you look at facilities reports, and unless you have that conversation, you don't really know what you're looking at, because every museum that I've been to, they have their data loggers in different places. I actually visited one museum who had their data loggers in their HVAC systems. So their HVAC systems were reporting, you know, this perfect climate, but actually the paintings on the wall, we had no idea what was going on there because there was no
Right.
information about it because everything
much
was
to
being
think about.
recorded. Yeah, within
Mm.
the facilities. So yeah, indeed, there is so much to think about here. So, well, I know we're running over time, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's time.
Thank
so
you.
huge thank you, Melissa. I just, once again, I think it's so inspiring to see that, you know, this idea of bespoke conditions. I mean, this is what BISO is calling for. This is what, you know, I've always advocated for. This is what the science shows, is that, you know, when it comes to setting climate control parameters for objects, each object might have a little bit of a different requirement. And that actually, if you're looking at climate control within an entire building, it's impossible to maintain strict standards. So if you have an object that's really sensitive, microclimates are a great solution, and maybe we need to think about if they go on loans in the first place. But when it comes down to it, you know, we're all on the same page that it's time to update climate control. And I'm just so grateful to all of you for being leaders in this and showing people how it can be done. So I would love to unpin ourselves and invite my colleagues back. And I know that that Peel had to run out, and because we're running over time. But I would just like to thank you all so much for this incredible conversation today. Just a very quick 1 or 2 sentences or words, any key takeaways from our conversation today, or any advice or anything that you'd like to share with our audience. And maybe Wouter, I can put you on the spot to start if you wouldn't mind.
No, I don't mind at all. I think it's a delight to be able to show people what you're working on, but it's even more inspiring to hear other people talk about it. So I just fully agree on the conversation being started, being kept afloat, and I think as a community we just put steps, we take steps forward every day again, small ones, but after 1 or 2 years, you look back and you see you have made a giant leap. That's one of the things I take with me of this afternoon.
Amazing. Thank you, Wouter. Thor, maybe I can put you on the spot next.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm just feeling so inspired by the rest of the speakers here, panelists. Thank you for great presentations. And I'm just really proud to see so many bright minds out there. So thank you. Yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And Melissa, any last pearls of wisdom for our audience today?
Well, at the risk of sounding cheesy, I just want to say, keep working together, and we're all on the same page. I think that we got into this field in this industry because we're so passionate about preserving history and working in our working with these collections, right? And we do want to continue to share that with each other, whether it's sharing through loans or through discussions like this with colleagues around the world. I think it's just amazing. And thank you for having me. And thank you to my fellow panelists. That was also very awesome to hear what you are all doing. So it is extremely inspiring. So thank you so much to everybody. And I hope we can all connect again in the future.
Absolutely. Yes. And a huge thank you to you guys, as I said, for your leadership in this space, and also for sharing your valuable experiences and insights with the world. We need to, continue to build this movement, but also continue to build community. And I would love to take this opportunity to invite all of our attendees and all of our audience who are viewing this later to join the community, become part of the programming. We're here to help support you, all of us. And we want to continue these conversations. So we look forward to welcoming you to the community to continue working together towards a sustainable future. So thank you so much again, everyone. A huge thank you to Thor, to Peel, to Melissa, and to Wouter for joining us today, for sharing their experiences. And thank you all so much for your time, and especially for your interest in this topic. Wishing you a lovely rest of your day, and look forward to seeing you very soon. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.